In some cities, crimes do not announce themselves. They happen, then disappear. In a city that never sleeps, the crimes began without reason. No fixed time, no repeated place, victims with no connection, and a killer with no pattern. All the evidence pointed to one person, a mysterious neighbor, disturbed, eccentric. But is everything that appears terrifying truly evil? Sometimes evil is not what we imagine, and at other times, our fears lead us to accuse the innocent, while the real killer is closer than we think, watching. The truth was not what everyone believed. But the most important question is, who is the killer? Welcome to the story of the Alexandria slasher. The murderer. We are now witnessing the final chapters of the story of the Alexandria murderer. Time, 2 o'clock in the afternoon on May 6th, 1965. Place, a narrow, filthy alley in one of the suburbs whose name I will not mention. A police truck, loaded with soldiers, blocks one side of the alley, and 3 or 4 cars are lined up on the other side. Some curious onlookers and loafers are watching what is happening, but the policemen are firmly pushing them back and helping evacuate the residents. Adel stands beside his car with its door open, while I sit in the passenger seat hunched over, visibly tense. Adel insisted that I witness the end of the story. A policeman steps forward and fixes the firing pin in his automatic rifle, and other things whose nature I do not know since I am no expert in firearms. But I have seen them all do something similar in the movies. Click. Crack. Click. That terrifying sound that tells you the rifle has become a living, alert instrument of death. I raised my head to Adel, who stood imposing and frightening, his hands on his hips, and I said, "Adel, I'm afraid." "That's not news," he replied coldly. "Won't you call out to him with a loudspeaker?" He smiled sarcastically as he tapped the car tire with the tip of his shoe. "Yes, and why don't we tell him, 'Surrender, Morsi. The police have you surrounded from all sides.'" "You watch too many movies, Rafat. You're naive." Then he raised his voice sternly. "I want 3 or 4 men there. We are not joking." Immediately, 3 men rushed to stand beside one of the ground floor windows, and I heard that ominous sound, click, crack, click, and my blood froze in my veins. There will be a massacre here in minutes. I said to Adel, "And now who is he?" He answered as he lit a cigarette, "His name is Saleh Mahmoud, unemployed, troubled, and currently broke. And who informed on him?" The landlord's wife, in whose building he lived, grew suspicious of his strange behavior and of his keeping all those knives. Then she noticed drops of blood on the staircase, and that was how the story began. So I asked him, "Why was he doing that?" Adel said calmly as he exhaled cigarette smoke, "My friend, you can't understand the way a murderer thinks. Some suffer from psychological complexes. Some are afflicted with paranoia. Others seek fame or feel a thrill in controlling killing. That's his problem, not ours." I sighed regretfully and said, "And I who risked myself and suffered over a baseless suspicion. I accused a sensitive, sick young man of the most hideous crimes. I even beat him severely." Adel smiled bitterly and said, "You're not alone, Rafat. I, Dr. Shaheen, and all our men who froze in the winter cold while watching that poor boy. The answer was right under our noses, here in Alexandria." Then he added, shaking his head, "In any case, all these misleading signs had never come together before, and if Sherlock Holmes had been in our place, he would have done the same." I said with a sigh, "The idea of cannibalism was exaggerated. It seems he's just an ordinary murderer, if that expression makes any sense." Suddenly, we heard rising commotion from the direction of the house. We lifted our heads to see a young man moving unsteadily on the roof of the old, crumbling building. His face was completely ordinary, like any young man you see every day, but his complexion looked strange, his features exhausted. He was wearing a pullover and dirty pajama trousers torn at the knees. Adel turned to one of his men and shouted sternly, "Saad, get him!" Saad rushed toward the filthy entrance of the building and disappeared into the darkness. I said to Adel anxiously, "But he looks like a normal person." Adel shot me a sarcastic look and said, "And what were you expecting? That the murderer would be a wild-haired madman with wandering eyes, running through the streets with a knife and drool dripping from his mouth?" Suddenly a savage scream erupted from the rooftop. Adel looked at his men and gestured with his hand, and they stormed into the building. We heard violent scuffling, curses shouted, and a voice crying out amid the chaos. Moments later, the men emerged, dragging a frenzied young man like a wild animal. Saleh was among them, his eyes swollen, blood flowing from his mouth, his body trembling with unbelievable agitation. He threatened and screamed as they dragged him across the ground. Then a pair of gleaming metal handcuffs appeared, closing the scene on the murderer at last. In fleeting moments, the cuff tightened firmly around his wrists. I don't know why his appearance reminded me of those rabid dogs caught by the dog handler with a leather noose at the end of a long iron pole. I always used to shudder when I imagined what might happen if that pole slipped from his hand. Suddenly, before I could grasp what was happening, the young man shoved the policeman holding the end of the cuff hard in the chest, knocking him to the ground. Then, almost in the same instant, he smashed the metal part in his hand against a ground floor window. Within seconds, the glass shattered into small fragments. He snatched a sharp shard and leapt away from them like a wounded beast. All this happened in the blink of an eye, and no one was able to intervene. Then suddenly I felt his arm twisting mine behind my back, and the sharp piece of glass pressing against my carotid artery. How unfortunate. The rabid dog had slipped from his handler. He screamed madly as he pressed the glass to my neck. "No one comes near me, or I'll slaughter this lamb." I felt the edge dig into my skin, almost piercing it. His hot breath, mixed with the smell of tobacco, lashed against my face, his voice a mixture of frenzy and fear. The policemen began to retreat cautiously, confusion evident on their faces. Even Adel himself seemed helpless for a moment. The murderer shouted again, "Move those cars away from the entrance immediately." I was trembling, but something inside me refused to submit. I am not strong, but I refuse to be used as a shield or to be called a lamb before everyone. In a single moment, I made my decision, and in a single moment, I carried it out. I threw my body backward to free myself from the edge of the glass, twisted my arm in the opposite direction of his, lifted my foot, and kicked the leg he was leaning on. He cried out in pain and fell to the ground, and before he could understand what had happened, 10 policemen had pounced on him, pinned him down, and secured him again, along with a few quick punches to calm his madness. I did not hear the words of congratulations, nor Adel's laughter as he patted my shoulder, not even the pounding of my own racing heart. I was only searching with my eyes for a place where I could safely lose consciousness. The conclusion. After we attended his exhibition at the Gotha Hall in Alexandria, Adele and I realized that Azat Sharif had truly reached the peak of his art. He stood there, slender, strangely pale, yet his eyes radiated confidence and pride. He spoke with journalists and beautiful women, smiling with the calm of an artist who had conquered himself. He shone like a star in the night over the sea. When he asked me my opinion of his first exhibition, I said to him, "I'll tell you a story I don't remember where I read." There was a sculptor carving a statue of a woman, striving for perfection in it. He worked on it year after year, decade after decade, until he completed it. When he finally finished, he looked at the statue in astonishment and said, "My God, it looks alive." Then he fell dead on the spot. Azat looked at me frowning and said, "A foolish story in my opinion, and I don't understand what you mean by it." I smiled and said, "Neither do I. I just remembered it, perhaps as a warning that the pursuit of perfection has its price." Adele laughed and gently pulled me toward a girl standing not far away. She had delicate features, enchanting with a shy smile. He said as he introduced her, "Allow me, Huwaida. This is Dr. Rafat, and Rafat, this is Huwaida. I hope you haven't forgotten each other." I looked at her, captivated by her beauty, and said in amazement, "Perhaps she forgot me, but as for me, impossible." At that moment, I felt that the time had come for me to be like everyone else, to speak of engagement, dowry, furniture lists, and all that social dread I had always avoided, to settle down at last. But I was, as usual, mistaken. For only 2 months later, I was in the West Indies, facing a new nightmare of an entirely different kind. But that is another story. Dr. Cairo May, 1992, Rafat Ismail, completed with praise to Allah,